sister says, if it's straight from the source, plant food and stuff like that. But how do you relate, let's say, real butter, which is straight pretty much from the source, as opposed to margarine, which is all of that? One says it's more natural and it only has one ingredient, therefore the less it has, the better. And the other one is it's got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down to Z, or less than that, and it's not natural.
Okay, so I'll use another example to answer your question. Arsenic is natural, right? So it's there in the environment and so on. So arsenic is natural. Cyanide is natural too. It's actually produced by plants, and you can concentrate it and purify it by certain plants. So arsenic and cyanide are natural, and if you had arsenic or cyanide and that was the only ingredient, you could argue that it was natural, and since it's natural and since it's only a single ingredient, that would probably be better for you than something else that has a whole long list of ingredients in it. So when we throw something else into there, we find out that the reasoning is there's a fallacy in the reasoning. Right? The reasoning process is based upon an assumption that a single ingredient is actually better than multiple ingredients. It's not true. It just depends on what the ingredient is, right? And so when we look at butter and margarines and so on, well, margarine's going to have negative effects. Butter is going to have negative effects. If you're looking at some kind of, sandwich spread that's kind of in that line, probably the best thing that we have currently is the margarines that are actually made from plant-based cholesterol, stanols and sterols. So there are a few of those that are out there, and I think I think Earth Balance is one of them. Anyways, there are a few that are out there that are actually made from plant-based cholesterols, and those plant-based cholesterols have been shown in studies to actually help to decrease cholesterol levels overall, because they compete with regular cholesterol for absorption in the end of the digestive tract, and then they're spit back out of the bloodstream and into the digestive tract easier than the regular cholesterol levels are. So if you're going to be using something, that might be something, or like we have a recipe for corn butter, and you basically add some salt and corn, throw it in a blender and blend it up crazy thin, and I'm trying to remember if they even used any coconut in that or not. Yeah, a little bit of coconut oil. Yeah, and so that there's other ways of going about it, but we could debate whether margarine is worse or whether butter is worse. Both of them are not really healthy for you. But again, the ones that are made from plant-based cholesterols are probably the best that we have in that line right now, but then not using them could be even better.
Question in reference to neuropathies and that type of thing. Is it reasonable to believe that when you follow the plans that you just outlined here, that you can have a reasonable reversal of those situations, if not a full recovery, or is that just pie in the sky thinking?
Yeah, so neuropathies, again, that's where you have problems with nerve sensation or nerve function, usually in an extremity and usually the longest extremities. Most likely associated with diabetes. Diabetes is the most common cause for neuropathy. And what happens with the neuropathy, and I'm going to be talking in relation to diabetes. With diabetic neuropathy, the longest cells in your body are the ones that go from your low back to your toes. Right? Those are the longest cells in your body, and it's a single cell that goes all the way from your low back all the way down to your toes. And so it's basically 1 meter long, 3 feet or so. That's a single cell, and in order for that cell to be able to function well, it's got to be able to shuttle proteins and other types of molecules from the main part of the cell and be able to shuttle them all the way down the length of that cell, all the way down to the other end, so that it can repair and it can, it can replace things and so on. So it takes a long time to transport all that way when you're talking about molecular-sized molecules and then that long of a transport system. Well, the transport system gets messed up because of the sugar. Increased sugar gets in there, it sugar coats a lot of the proteins in that transport mechanism, and so it takes a lot longer to get things from one end to the other. And so now the cell's not able to repair really well from damage and injury and other things that it sustains. Plus, when you have increased sugar that gets into the cells, if it has too much, it converts some of it into sorbitol, and sorbitol can't be excreted from the cell. And so it causes the cells to swell. It's like filling a balloon with water and salt and then putting the balloon, a semi-permeable balloon, in a water environment, and it'll swell because the water wants to go where the sugar is or where the salt is, and it'll just blow it up. Same thing happens with the nerves. And so that sorbitol accumulation plus the sugar mucking up the transport mechanism, it starts messing up those nerves. And the longest nerves are the ones that get affected first. So it almost always starts in the toes and works its way up. And then once it gets short enough on the legs, then it starts affecting the hands as well, because that's the next longest nerves in the body, and then it works its way up from that standpoint. We had a physician at UC Pines, Win Horsley, and he's a physical medicine rehabilitation specialist. And so what he did is he took a series of patients that went through our lifestyle center that had diabetic neuropathy, and he did nerve conduction studies on them at the beginning when they came to UC Pines, and then when they were done with their program and they were heading home. And what he was able to show was that there was a significant reversal of the nerve conduction delay that was there with the neuropathy when an individual, between when they came and when they left. And in quite a few cases, there was a complete reversal that by the time the individuals left, only 17 days later, that they had normal conduction velocities down the nerves by the time that they left. And many individuals that come, again, with a diabetic neuropathy, many individuals have significant improvement in their symptoms associated with it, even within a couple weeks of applying these principles. Now, it's not universal, and there's some individuals that have neuropathies from other causes. Like sometimes we have individuals that have been on chemotherapy and they have a chemotherapy related neuropathy. Sometimes those don't respond very well because the nerves have been injured really badly because of that. There's some that have autoimmune neuropathies, and those are much more difficult to treat. Diabetic neuropathy is much easier to treat. But the farther Was that me? Or that was someone else. All right. Sorry, my joints are acting up. Diabetic neuropathy. All right, I got off track on that one. It's coming again.
Diabetic neuropathy, easy to treat.
Yeah. Okay. If it gets too late, if it gets there's a progression of the neuropathy. It begins, you have some abnormal sensations, then there's this kind of pins and needle type of thing going on, and then later it turns into a burning, and the burning is kind of intermittent, and then the burning becomes more permanent, and then the burning kind of turns into a numbness, and eventually you can get to the point where you're actually completely numb, you can't feel your feet at all, and it's like lead bricks. Well, the farther you go in that process, the harder it is to turn around. So if you're pins and needles, oh yeah, that turns around, and it turns around easily. If you're burning, well, that turns around too. The cases that I actually really like are the ones where people come in and they're numb, and then partway through the program, they're like, oh, my feet are hurting. Like, oh, that's good. That's actually good, right? You don't like it because it was okay being numb, but I like it because it tells me that the nerves are actually starting to reverse, right? The problem is starting to reverse. You've gone from numb, and now you're into burning. All right, so that means the process is actually, starting to reverse. And so we have seen that, but again, the farther it is in the process and the longer it's been there, the more difficult it is to turn around. But the majority of individuals with diabetes, with diabetic neuropathy, it turns around and significantly improves. Oh, that was the one that was bad, huh? Microphone. Handheld.
Is this working? Jim? Is it dying? Did it die?
Oh, yeah, that's the problem. All right, you got the Sennheiser. This one.
Okay.
That one will work.
Yeah, okay. One real quick one about water fasting. I've tried it several times, and the day that I fast, I can't even get out of my own way. I have no energy whatsoever. Is there anything that can be done to rectify that as far as energy level is concerned, from 0 to maybe lift it up just a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, my own experience with fasting, each time I fast, it's a little bit different. There are some times when I fast and I feel like I can't do anything.
That's what I'm talking about.
And there's other times when I fast and I'm like, oh, I forgot I was fasting. And there's other times when I fast and I've got a headache and I'm just feeling bad. And there's other times when I fast and I feel sick to my stomach. And I just feel like, And there's other times, again, and then it's back and I forgot that I was fasting for the day. And I don't know what makes the difference between kind of one and the other. One of the benefits of being at the Lifestyle Center and doing the fasting there is that you got a lot of people around you, and you got a schedule, and you got to be at things, and there's stuff to get your mind off of, whatever. You're going to classes, and you're doing this, and you're in that lecture, and you're whatever. And so there's enough there that kind of forces you to get out and still participate and then get distracted by other types of things during that time. And so individuals usually do fairly well when it comes to the fasting, and maybe that's a key component. But as far as like eat this combination of things the day before you fast so that you'll have energy while you're fasting, I don't know. Yeah.
We'll do as the hands progress to that. So this is the next row.
All right.
Thank you so much for you and your family for sharing with us today, first of all.
My pleasure.
2 quick questions. Normally when people talk about inflammation, it's an immune response. With diabetes, are we talking basically the same thing, or are you talking more of a pancreatic type of inflammation, number 1? Number 2, what's the best explanation to give someone when you want to tell them when they prick themselves and they have the initial release of blood, to wipe that off first and then get another release of blood to test that? What is the purpose for that?
Okay. All right. Well, I'll answer the second one first because it's easier. Because when you use the alcohol swabs, sometimes the alcohol can be caught up with that first drop of blood, and the alcohol in the blood with the sample can mess up the reading for the blood sugar. So that's one reason for just wiping off the first bit of blood and then getting the second part of it. When it comes to inflammation actually sometimes we use terms and we use phrases in a way that doesn't portray the information completely, because you're trying to get through a topic and cover things. So now that you've asked the question with inflammation, we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. Inflammation itself is not a problem. The cause of inflammation is a problem, because inflammation is the body's response to injury. And so you can have cellular injury, tissue injury. It might be because of a trauma. It might be because of an infection. It might be because of something, right, that's going on. And inflammation is the body's response to that thing. And so inflammation itself is not the problem. There's a cause that is leading to the development of the inflammation. And the simple way with the diabetes of just presenting it is to say that fats and inflammation are the driving forces, which, again, there's lots of research showing that that's early in the process. Then the real question is, well, then what's the driving factor for the inflammation? Well, the fats, the products of high temperature cooking, the acrylamides and the advanced glycation end products and all of these different things from our dietary standpoint, we know that those promote cellular damage, cellular injury, and then the production of inflammation associated with it. Even the fats and the high fats are pro-inflammatory as well. And if you take those in, even if they're from a plant source, but they're not with all of the antioxidants that were packaged in the original plant food in the first place, then even the regular oils, olive oil, coconut oil, and other things, they're pro-inflammatory too. If they're removed from the olive and removed from the coconut and removed from the whatever. And so it's likely the dietary components that are doing that, but we can also look at other causes for inflammation too. For example, the question that we can ask ourselves is, can thinking lead to inflammation? Right? And I'll tell you the answer is yes. Yes. One's thoughts and one's attitudes communicated via the nerves to a particular location can then set up an inflammatory response in that area. And so one can have inflammation in relation to stress, loss, mourning, divorce, anger, other types of things like that. And there can be actual production of inflammation because of that information communicated via the nerves to the tissues that the nerves feed, right? And then having that response. And so that's also a potential thing as well, and a very interesting one to explore. Yes?
Quick question. So I noticed that your goal is to get the fasting reading under 90, but I've heard that under 120 is okay, so it kind of seems like a discrepancy to me.
Yeah, well, under 120, if you're running 300, under 120 is going to be much better. And if you're running 300s and you're aiming for under 120, that's great. But once you get under 120, I want you to aim lower. Why? Because I know that if you're running 90s, 100s, and you're doing so consistently, then your pre-diabetes or diabetes is going to eventually take off, right? It'll eventually go there, and the protective range is really under 90, and so that's really what we aim for, and that's really where you see the consistent diabetes reversal. Is once you can get those down below 90, and you can keep it there with the fasting blood sugar levels, then that diabetes starts really turning around and improving. Two rows back.
Just a real quick one. You were talking about artificial sweeteners. What about stevia?
Stevia, if you are consuming the plant, it's much better than if you have the processed white stevia powder. We used to, we have stevia in our herb kitchen and our tea kitchen so that individuals can use, and we actually used to grow stevia on campus. I remember going and picking stevia, and I'm not sure exactly what happened to that stevia patch. I think that farmer left, and then the next one didn't know about stevia. But using the whole product would definitely be better. I have not done the research with stevia. I have heard a couple colleagues mention that the processed stevia has potentially some of the same effects as some of the other artificial sweeteners. I think since it's coming from a natural source, it's going to be better for you than like the aspartame and so on. And using the whole plant rather than the processed white powdery stevia would be a better idea. Sure.
Hi. With respect to vitamin D, I think I heard a year or so ago that if you're going to be out in the sun with the prospect of absorbing vitamin D, that it's good not to take a shower right after, like within a couple of hours, or I forget what the exact time frame was, but that your body needs time to absorb the vitamin D. So you shouldn't like sunbathe and then go and take a shower, because that defeats the purpose.
Right. There is a study that's looking at what you do after you sunbathe and its effects on vitamin D production based on those activities. And the indication from the study is that if you cool off the skin after sunbathing, then it tends to blunt the effect of vitamin D production. So maintaining a warm skin temperature tends to be the effect. And the shower, it's not so much the washing, it's the temperature. I think that's the big issue associated with it. So cooling off of the skin after sunbathing tends to blunt the vitamin D production. Yeah.
Hi. Everything that you mentioned about type 2 diabetes, does that apply to type 1 diabetes as well?
If you have somebody that's type 1 that has type 1 diabetes, I wouldn't do the fasting. I wouldn't fast them because they're not producing the insulin. It's not going to bring their blood sugar levels down. And the thing that's really important for a type 1 diabetic is consistency. That's really important for a type 1 diabetic is to have the same kind of meals every day. I don't mean the same food, but you have basically the same proportion of your greens and your vegetables and your whole grains and so on, and that's what breakfast kind of looks like, and then this is what lunch kind of looks like, and breakfast is always at this time and lunch is always at this time, and so on. So that consistency is really important because they're going to be dependent upon insulin. And the better that you can predict the insulin response, the better you can titrate the insulin dosing in order to keep those blood sugar levels under a tight control without going too low. So when we have type 1 diabetics, we don't fast them. But a whole food plant-based diet does wonders to the insulin dosing that's necessary. For example, I didn't have her story on here, but we'll just call her Angeline. And so Angeline came to us this summer. She was one of the patients that I had in July. And she came to us. She was type 2 diabetic, and she wasn't sure whether she had converted to type 1 or not, but she was on 300 units of insulin a day. And that was, she had 2 Lantus doses, once in the morning, once in the evening. That's the long-acting insulin to cover. And then she had a short-acting insulin that she would take around meal times. And she was on 3 meals a day, and she was taking about 50 units of short-acting insulin with each meal. And then she had about 75 units of insulin in the morning and the evening with her long-acting. And so, it's just incredible numbers of insulin that she was taking. So when she was with us, we weren't sure if she was type 1 or not. Because sometimes individuals, even with those high insulin doses, they're not really type 1. And so one way to find out is to just fast them. Take them off all the insulin, all the diabetes medication, fast them and see what happens with the sugars. Well, after a day, her sugar levels were higher than what they were the day before. And so after 1 day of fasting, I stopped it. We put her back on the insulin, but I put her on less because I knew that we were going to have her eating 2 meals a day and not 3. And I knew it was a whole food plant-based diet, and so it wasn't going to be pushing her blood sugar levels like it was before. And so over the time frame of the 2.5 weeks, I was able to help her with titrating her insulin dosages so that when she left, she was on 90 units of insulin. Right. So she went from 300 down to 90, which is a significant improvement. And why is it important? Well, because with exogenous or outside of the body administered insulin, you actually promote the development, or you promote the production of IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, and that's a very strong inflammatory molecule. And so the more insulin that you take by injection, the more inflammation that it promotes with it. And so if you can, even if you're a type 1 diabetic and you're still dependent upon insulin, the least dose that you can take, the better it is for you. And so yes, the exercise and exercising regularly. Every meal, go exercise, right? And regularity in the meals, regularity in the times, using lots of fiber in the food, whole food, plant-based. You can include some of the herbs or whatever that have been shown to have some benefit, and then put a program together so that you can get to the minimum dose necessary in order to keep them at a good level. But then with type 1 diabetics, you know that if they ever get sick, then their insulin requirements start shooting up. And so the healthy diet and the healthy lifestyle prevent or help to decrease the amount of illnesses that an individual has, so that they don't have those periods of crises where the sugar levels start taking off. But you got to watch out for that. And if the insulin requirements are increasing, the blood sugars are starting to get out of control, then it's looking for, okay, what's developing? Is there an infection? Is there something like that that's going on? And get on top of it right away.
So that leads me to another question. So if that lifestyle works for type 1, then would it also reverse their, circulation issues or, blindness issues?
Yeah, it can decrease the complications associated with the diabetes, especially as they keep those blood sugar levels under control and the hemoglobin A1C levels low, because that A1C level is gonna give you the best idea of how well you've got the blood sugar levels under control. And if you're really looking at reversing or preventing the development of the complications associated with diabetes, then you're really looking at getting a hemoglobin A1C of 5.6 or below. But that's going to be really difficult with a type 1, because everything that I talked about the increased death with the tighter control is true for a type 1, and you can't just get them off the insulin because they need to have the insulin. So it's this tricky balance of trying to keep them around 6.5, maybe into the 6 range or so with the hemoglobin A1Cs, not risking death by having too much insulin and driving their blood sugar levels low, but trying to prevent so much of the development of the complications associated with diabetes by having the levels higher. And with type 1 diabetes, I know of individuals that have lived into their 60s with type 1 diabetes starting when they were in 3 to 5 years of age. And so with that tight control, you can look at a relatively normal lifespan with type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just a quick, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Just a quick question. Could you address the difference between vitamin D2 and vitamin D3? I understand that 2 is better for a vegan, but then we have a problem if it comes in capsule form, because you don't know what the capsule is made of.
Okay, so vitamin D2 versus vitamin D3. Vitamin D is actually a hormone. It's not a vitamin. They named it as a vitamin, but then they discovered later that it's a hormone. And the original product is cholesterol. Right, so that's where vitamin D starts, is cholesterol. And so you have cholesterol under the skin, near the blood vessels, and as the sunlight strikes it, it converts the cholesterol, and you form a vitamin D precursor, which is then transported in the cardiovascular system to the kidneys. The kidneys process it further, and you have vitamin D, which is D3. That is the actual active form that the body needs. And then there's this question of vitamin D2 versus D3, because in the past, the only way that you could get a plant-based vitamin D was to have D2, because all of your vitamin D3 was animal-based, and about the best that you could do was sheep lanolin, which is sheep wool, and getting vitamin D3 from sheep wool. And and so a lot of people were using D2 because that was from a plant source. Weimar actually had been using vitamin D2 in supplementation with their patients, and they were doing a blood test that was just looking at total vitamin D levels. And with the vitamin D2 supplementation, the vitamin D levels were going up. But then they switched labs. And the lab that they switched to offered them the option of doing a D2, D3 level. So it would differentiate between the D2 and D3. And what they found is that when they supplemented with the vitamin D2, the D2 levels went up and the D3 levels went down. And so the overall level was going up, and when you're just measuring an overall level, it looked like it was improving with that, but the actual D3, which is the active form of vitamin D, was actually going down with D2 supplementation. So I absolutely recommend D3 if you're going to be supplementing with, if you're going to be taking a supplement. Vitamin Sunshine, body does okay with that, but when you're looking at supplementation of vitamin D3, and now we have a plant-based source. Well, quasi-plant-based source. It's lichen. They figured out that D3 is in lichen, and they've been able to extract D3 from lichen. And so there is a plant-based or a vegan D3 that they get from lichen. And when they do that, they make sure that they put it in a veggie cap. So you're not having to deal with the gelatin issues of the capsules. Got one up front.
See one last hand.
3 last hands. Hi, buddy. Yeah.
The B12, the not psycho.
Cyanocobalamin.
Right? Versus the methyl whatever.
Methylcobalamin.
For those who want to become vegans, which is the best of the two?
Okay, so the usual synthetic form of vitamin B12 is cyanocobalamin. That's the usual form that is used to develop B12. The majority of individuals do okay with cyanocobalamin, and it will cause their B12 levels to go up. And if they had B12 deficiency symptoms, neurologic stuff, and whatever that was going on, then it will usually help with that. There are some individuals that have problems. They can have genetic mutations, especially with the MTHFR gene. That's the methyltetrahydrofolate reductase gene, and with those genetic mutations, it's more difficult for them to be able to utilize B12, especially the cyanocobalamin, and they do much better with methylcobalamin. Methylcobalamin is the more natural form, and it's better absorbed than the cyanocobalamin. It might be more expensive, it's less available, but it's absorbed better and it's utilized better in the body than the cyanocobalamin. The cyanocobalamin, the cyano part of it is cyanide. And in fact, if you look at treating cyanide poisoning, one of the treatments is methylcobalamin, because high doses of it taken in, then the cyanide will then attach to it and turn it into cyanocobalamin, and it's not toxic anymore. That it's been combined together. So that's in your cyanide kit. Is actually B12, but that other version of it. Last two. Oh, last one.
Okay, it's not really a question. I just wanted to say that about 5 months ago, my sugar was off the charts. Off the charts. That Sabbath morning, I was supposed to share, and I could not even do so because I could not feel my left foot. I was falling asleep all over the place. I had excessive thirst, the tingling, everything. And everybody was telling me, you're going to die. And when I spoke to the natural doctor, first of all, they wanted me to take meds. And I said, I don't want to take any medication. And the natural doctor said, he told me, he said, if you're going to eat with the Babylonians, you have to take the Babylonian treatment. And I said, I don't want the Babylonian treatment. So, and so they brought the meds over, and I almost took it because it was so high and it was this scary what was going on inside my body. They said, bring it down to the normal levels, then go natural. And I almost went that route. And then I took it out and said, no, I'm not going to do it. I said, I'm going to give this to God. If I go, then He's going to allow it to go. I'm giving it to Him. And so I ate raw for 2 months with herbal treatments and so forth. And in the middle of all that, I was sleeping one night, and God, in the middle of the night, brought to my mind Exodus 16:26, I think it is. 15:26, which was His way of telling me, if you let me heal you spiritually, I'll heal you physically. And He did that. And now my sugar's lower than hers. So, so God is good.
Amen.
And she's not diabetic.
Right. Amen. Amen. Yeah, it's diabetes is one of the very rewarding diseases when it comes to natural remedies because it is so reversible compared to some of the others. When you get into autoimmune stuff, then it gets a bit tricky, and responses are variable. But we've seen some impressive things from that standpoint, but it's not all the time, and not always. It's not all the time, and it's not with everyone, and I'm not God, and I don't know who's going to respond. I don't know who's going to stick with it. I don't know who, even if they stick with it, they're still going to have difficulties or problems or trials. But I'm willing to work with anyone and try to help them along the way as much as we can, and pray together and look to the divine healer to be our strength and our hope and our sufficiency.
Amen. Mm-hmm. Once again, Dr. Sandoval, we appreciate so much the fact that you come. Is that working? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that you've shared so freely, and you've given so much of your time, and also to your family, to Lalita. And we appreciate you and your family, and we look forward to your visit. If you're down here before next Christmas, please look us up. We'd love that.
All right.
I really thought it was interesting when you mentioned how thinking God's way, when we think God's way, that it brings healing to our body. And I can't help but think of many scriptures, but the one in Philippians 4:8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. I think that we cannot go wrong when we think God's thoughts. And He will guide us into all truth, and He will guide us into all health. God bless you all. Have an amazing 2019. It's coming up very soon. So we'll see you next year, if not before.
Amen.
And don't forget, we'll see you next